Good morning. We have a lot to cover today, but maybe we'll do it in two parts if we need to. The mitzvah that we're going to be learning today is the prohibition of do not steal. Do not steal. Okay? Lo tignov, right? Do not steal. The Sefer Chinuch actually has very little to say about this mitzvah. It's, if you're in, if you can see it in the book, it's only one paragraph he has, whereas in most of the other things, he has several pages. He starts off by saying, Shelo lignov nefesh mi Yisrael, that you are not to steal a Jew, a nefesh, a soul from Israel. Like kidnap, exactly. So already, and the Sefer Chinuch is saying something that should be a little bit surprising to us. He's saying this mitzvah of do not steal is really the mitzvah of do not kidnap, okay? Do not kidnap. Do not steal a person. What propels him to say this? I mean, the pshat doesn't say don't steal a person. It says do not steal, right? Which presumably could be a person, but could also be just do not steal people's properties. Why doesn't he say that?
Why using the strict definition rather than a book?
Yeah, why so narrowed is the Sefer Chinuch? Now, he's not alone, by the way. It's based on a Rashi, and in fact, I think I brought the Rashi, yes. I didn't number the pages, so I apologize. But on the page that has Rashi in Hebrew on the top, Rashi is going to give us a reason. Now, I should point out ahead of time that the Sefer Chinuch is probably in the majority when he says the mitzvah is do not kidnap, but there's also a great number of commentaries, really led by the Sforno, who says, no, when it says lo tignov, it means lo tignov, and it's actually a very broad, and in fact, there's many different types of stealing. We'll talk about some of them later. You'll see right next to that Rashi, I brought you the Tosefta on Breshit. It actually appears in Bava Kama, which says there's actually 7 different forms of stealing, 7 different forms of thievery. No, there's only one page, but it has 2 sides. Unless you got my original. Here, take that, and I'll take that back. And then there's someone else who has a 1-page. Oh, do you want it? You can. Okay, I'll give it back.
Oh, I don't need it.
Okay.
I have another one.
Now you have. Okay. So why does? Is that 2 there you have? Okay, so Jerry, you can get the one. Okay. So why does Rashi focus? We're going to see in just a moment, on do not kidnap. That he says the mitzvah lo tignov is actually do not kidnap. So if you look at Rashi, he's quoting it from the Gemara in Sanhedrin. Lo tignov, begonev nifashot hakatuv midaber. The pasuk is speaking about souls, do not kidnap really. There's another verse later, lo tignavu, which we actually just read recently in Vayikra, and there, it actually is in plural. Lo tignavu is all the different types of stealing that we're talking about, right? There's going to be a theft of intellectual property, there's genevas dat, there's stealing of property, all these different things, but that's later in Vayikra. Here, in Shmot, in the 10 Commandments, it just says lo tignov in one word, in singular. Over there, it's begonev mamon, dealing with money. How do we know this? Maybe this pasuk here in Shmot, in the 10 Commandments, is about money. And maybe over there it's actually dealing with nifashot. How do we know the difference? You learn from the context with which it appears. What's the context? Ma lo tirtzach. Here, right before lo tignov, it says do not murder. And it says do not commit adultery. And all of these mitzvot of do not murder, do not commit adultery, and the like, shechayavim alav mita beitin, you would be put to death for violating them. So it only makes sense that lo tignov here is also a mitzvah of capital punishment, and you do not get capital punishment if you simply steal someone's wallet, but you do get capital punishment if you were to kidnap a person. And so therefore, that's why Rashi says it has to be that this mitzvah is dealing with kidnapping, not just the general forms. However, you could ask a question on Rashi. We're not going to right now, or at least we're not going to answer. There's other times in the Torah where the commandment is do not steal, or do not have some form of stealing involved, and the punishment is death there as well. So why do we need this verse also? But we'll see sort of when we let it play out, these two sides, Rashi and the Sefer Chinuch and many others on one side who say the mitzvah is about kidnapping, and the Tosefta, which I quoted already, the Sforno, and others who say no, the mitzvah is all the different forms of kidnapping. We're going to look at that in just a moment. Yes?
No count as one? That's not my question. All these stealings.
All these stealings count as one, maybe, okay? Actually, we're gonna talk about that in just a moment. When we get to the Sforno, when we get to the second opinion, we're gonna have to talk, what does it mean when you have a mitzvah that has sort of many tributaries? Okay, we'll talk a little bit about that. But before I even get to talk about Rashi's position, the Sefer Chinuch's position, that we're talking about kidnapping, I just want to share with you a quick, interesting moral dilemma that, in a sense, highlights Rashi's position, or highlights the position that this mitzvah is serious, right? You might say Geneva Stat and intellectual, stealing of intellectual property. Those are serious crimes, but they don't rise to the level of kidnapping. Rashi saying no. When you see in the Ten Commandments, it says lo tignov, it's kidnapping. It's a very serious crime. We can get a sense of that opinion, and you can see it reflected in another argument that appears, something called the Heinz dilemma. Has anyone ever heard the Heinz dilemma? It's not whether or not, my kids have this dilemma all the time, whether or not they should have Heinz ketchup or Osem ketchup. Osem's much sweeter, Heinz is apparently better, but no, that's not the dilemma. This is a dilemma introduced for dealing with a moral education of children by an author by the name of Kohlberg. He created a dilemma to sort of test how do kids think about morality. And he created 6 different levels of how you might think about morality to get a sense ahead of time where your children are heading when it comes to moral questions. So in particular, he gives this particular case. He says this is a number of years ago, there is a woman named Clara, and Clara has a disease, and she's going to die, and she's going to die if she does not get a certain medicine. There's someone in the town, a pharmacist, who just invented the drug that will save her life. And he spent a lot of time working on this drug, and he now has the drug, and it's $4,000. So Clara sends her husband, Heinz, to go get the drug, and he doesn't have the $4,000. So he goes to all of his friends, all of his neighbors, and he goes from door to door, and he collects $2,000. And he goes to Heinz and says, he goes to the pharmacist and says, I don't have $4,000. Here's $2,000. Would you be willing to give me the drug? It will save my wife's life if you give it to me. And the pharmacist says, absolutely not. I've spent many, many years on this. The reason why I developed this drug is so that I could make a living for myself and my own family. You have to give me the $4,000 or I'm not going to give you the drug. Heinz goes back. He doesn't know what to do. His wife is going to die unless she gets this drug. And he therefore decides that perhaps he should break into the pharmacy at night and steal the drug. And the question is he correct in doing that? Right? What is the moral question here? The moral question is, can you violate one prohibition, stealing, in order to save the life of another individual? There's a lot of other complications. There's questions of if you steal the drug and the value of the drug goes down, maybe other people won't develop such drugs in the future, but we're not dealing with the global macro issue, the micro issue. If you're Heinz, do you steal in order to save your life? You say yes. Most people, by the way, most adults, I should point out, say yes. The reason why Kohlberg does this test is those who can't see beyond the regular rules, who can't understand that there's exceptions to every rule, don't have yet a developed sense of moral theory. Right? They only know, I've been told X, and that's it, I can't do anything further. Those who say yes are at the higher level of moral theory because they understand, well, there's a law, but sometimes the law has to be broken in order to fulfill a more important principle. And part of that inclination, I think, comes from within Judaism, right? What do we say about laws in general? That you're allowed to violate certain laws. The most famous case is, of course, Shabbat, right? Pikuach nefesh docha Shabbat. In order to save a life, you can break the laws of Shabbat. And there's only 3 exceptions, and those 3 exceptions are the 3 cardinal things, right, of, Gilui Arot, like incest, adultery, things along those lines. If someone says to murder someone to save a life, you're not allowed to do so, and to commit idolatry in public and things along those lines. So that seems to be the right answer. However, when you look at the Jewish sources, there's actually a 3-way machloket about what you should actually do in this case. And the reason why I say in this case, because this case has come up in real life in a number of different instances. During the Holocaust in the Warsaw Ghetto, there were 2 brothers, and one of the brothers was taken by the Nazis, and they threatened to kill him unless he revealed where his brother's wealth was kept. His brother had a great deal of wealth. By the way, so did the first brother. But they didn't ask him about his. They said, where is your brother's wealth? We know he has this wealth. He hid it somewhere. And we're going to kill you unless you share us with this information. He shares the information with the Nazis. Both brothers thankfully survive. They get to Tel Aviv after the war, and in rabbinical court, the brother who had all his money stolen from the Nazis sues his other brother and says, how could you give up all of my wealth? And he sues him for getting reimbursed in this regard. I'm not going to tell you just yet what the rabbinical court decided, but you see that the question does arise. Actually, more recently, someone just wrote a she'ela, a halakhic question to Rabbi Dr. Asher Meir, who writes a lot of the books that deal with Judaism and economics, a more modern case. This person's a doctor, and they have a patient who's very ill, and there is a medical procedure that can save this patient's life. However, whatever country this person lives in, who wrote the question, the healthcare system is such that you have a certain limit of how much you can take advantage of the healthcare system. So this person's already gone past their limit. However, there's another person in the family who hasn't yet used any of their credits. So the doctor asked the question, can I simply write that this medicine or this procedure is for the other member of their family who has the rights, and then simply give it to this person instead in order to save the life, but I have to lie in order to save a life. And I have to, in a sense, steal from the insurance company. So here you see sort of another parallel Heinz case. Should the doctor do that to save a life? And again, we're tempted to say, well, if there's a medicine to save a person's life, whatever we have to do. But if you look at the sources, it's not always that clear that that's in fact what you should do. I'll give you a couple of few examples. For example, the Jerusalem Talmud. I mentioned to you before about you're allowed to violate any law in order to save a life, except for the 3. The Jerusalem Talmud actually says there are 4 laws that you're not allowed to violate. And wouldn't you know what's the 4th law? Lo tignov. Lo tignov also is on that same level of do not murder. Some say it's actually a part of lo tignov, of lo tirtzach. It's actually part of the same. How do we know this? The Torah tells us, for example, that we treat burglars differently if they come in the daytime and if they come at the nighttime. If they come at the daytime, you're not allowed to use, you can't take out your shotgun and shoot them in the daytime. But if you come at the nighttime, you can. There's a different level of rights in terms of self-defense. Why? The Torah even tells us because we're suspicious that the person who breaks in at night, right? There's 2 different opinions actually. Some say the person who breaks in the daytime is more brazen because he's coming in the daytime, but the person in the night, he's coming potentially to kill you. So therefore you're allowed to defend yourself. So in a sense, a person who's coming to rob you may go further and actually kill you in order to be successful with the robbery. In American law, by the way, we have this actual case. It's called the felony murder law. A person breaks into a bank, and if someone dies in the commission of that crime, he's held liable as if it's murder, even if he had no intention to do so, meaning he runs in, he runs out, and as he's running out, even something ad kidei kach that the security guard trips, chasing him and dies, he's liable for that murder. He had no intention, but he started a dangerous set of chain of events, and therefore he's guilty for that. So that's one of the opinions. Jerusalem Talmud says, no, he also would be guilty. You cannot give up your life. In fact, the Rambam quotes, the Rambam doesn't hold this himself, but he says in the Gemara, Rabbi Meir seems to suggest if you're given the choice of signing over someone else's property to the authorities, very similar to our case, the Nazi case, or taking martyrdom, you should take martyrdom. That you're not allowed to, you actually have to risk your life in order not to violate do not kill. And there's one more way we can understand this as well. The Gemara that gives us the permission, where do we get the permission to violate Shabbat in order to save a life? Where does that come from? So the Gemara actually in Yoma gives us a few options. It gives us 5 different possible explanations. The one that's most familiar with us, it says, the Torah tells us, the mitzvot are b'chai behem. You should live by them. They're not meant to kill you, they're meant to allow you to live. That's what we usually accept. But there's 5 opinions actually. One opinion says, for example, it's connected to Brit Milah. Brit Milah takes precedent over Shabbat, and that's to save only one part of a person's body. So it's a kal v'chomer, all the more so to save your entire body, so you're allowed to violate Shabbat as well. And then there's another answer that's relevant. It says, in the temple service takes precedence over Shabbat, right? We violate Shabbat for the temple service on them. If the Kohen Gadol is needed in court to give eyewitness testimony that will save a person's life who's been wrongly accused of murder, the Kohen Gadol is allowed to, not allowed, he must leave the temple service in order to save this person's life. So we have a proof that saving a person's life takes precedence over the temple service, which takes precedence over Shabbat, so therefore life takes precedence over saving a life, over Shabbat. We don't have that, however, with robbery, right? You're not allowed to steal something and then bring it to the temple service. It's not counted as a contribution. So robbery doesn't take precedence over the temple service, so therefore perhaps you could say robbery also, you're not allowed to steal in order to save your life. Okay, so that's one of the opinions that's out there that basically says you have to give up your life in order to, rather than steal. So that's one possibility. That's not the mainstream opinion, though. The mainstream opinion is also not what I'm going to say now. The mainstream opinion, this opinion is the Ravid. The Ravid says robbery is not one of those 3 cardinal laws. It's once your life is threatened, that's it. You can do almost anything except those 3 principles, and so therefore you don't have to do anything at all. The mainstream opinion, however, is based upon a Gemara in Bava Kama, I believe. You're running away from a person who wants to kill you. And as you're running away from the person who wants to kill you, one of the ways to escape is to run through the marketplace, and as you're running through the marketplace, you're going to break a lot of expensive vessels. You're going to run through and you're going to break these things as you're running away. 1, are you allowed to break those things in order to run away? Yes, you're allowed to run. To save your life, you can do it. 2, do you have to compensate the owners of these things as you're running away? So the Gemara says, if the owner is the person who's chasing you, you don't have to compensate him. Why? You're allowed to kill this guy. He's chasing you. So if you're allowed to kill him, you certainly can destroy his vessels. But if it's a third person, if you break these items, and you're allowed to break them, afterwards, you have to eventually then pay him back. You have to pay it as, it's almost like a forced loan, so to speak. And that seems to be the main opinion in terms of how you deal with these type of questions. The Heinz challenge, so to speak, is that you have the right to steal that pharmacy, that drug, but you then have to pay back the person as soon as you're able to get the money. That was how the rabbinical court decided in Tel Aviv, is that this brother who gave up his other brothers all his property, they suggested they try to come to some type of compromise where the first brother pays or compensates in some level.
But they both wouldn't be alive if you didn't do that.
Right. Well, that's what it's not. You're absolutely right that it's not as clear-cut a case as I just described, because I'm describing it for a specific purpose. The rabbinical court doesn't come with an actual decision. The rabbinical court says, listen, he was under duress, to save his life. He was this. This is what we recommend to the 2 brothers that you guys should, which probably is good advice anyway for 2 brothers. Yeah, the first brother, you actually survived the war with some money, split it with your brother, come up with some type of, and that's what they recommended. But they quoted this other Gemara that says, in theory, even when you're allowed to steal someone's property to save your life, you're not really stealing the property. You're taking it as a loan, a forced loan. The only question is if it would discourage someone from saving a person's life, right? To save someone else's life, not mine, I will be hesitant to risk someone else's property if I know I have to pay it back. So then in that instance, we say, no, hold like the Ravid, you don't have to pay back at all. But otherwise, you generally have to pay back.
You heard the story with the Levitt, right? I would assume.
Yeah, I'm trying to think, Yosef, yeah.
When they hijacked the plane and they sold
Yeah, I've heard it, but I can't remember it exactly.
And they returned, not only did they return the plane, but they paid them back for
The
the gas.
gas, right, exactly. So that's, yeah, right.
It's amazing.
That's the way to do it,
So
yes.
it's in Israel where a patient had a respiratory arrest in the hospital and they had dentures and they broke the dentures or lost them to the doctors. And then the patient's family survived, it says she sued because of the damage on the dentures to save money and the hospital had to pay.
Hospital. Huh, it's interesting. So, yeah, Jerry.
Oftentimes you have drug companies that make these miracle.
Right.
Cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. And they don't give them out
For free.
to people who can't afford them. Do you have any rights there? Who's trying to steal it? Can you take them to court?
It sounds like a made-for-TV movie, right? You know, there's a group of old guys who get out of the hospital, right, who put on black masks to break into Merck in New Jersey.
And it costs millions of dollars
Correct.
to develop it.
Millions, billions, you know, exactly. Listen, that's one of the big conflicts in developing a healthcare system. Both in Israel, there's a lot of fights over which medicines make it on and which don't. I know in my own personal life, my father is on a drug that costs $10,000 a month. He's covered, although he's not actually covered. He's covered all the way up until I think we have to pay $500 a month. But even that, there's now a nonprofit organization that helps people pay for the difference in, but it's a dilemma because there are many people who are not covered and are going to die because they don't have access to this. The drug company, of course, argues, listen, we're not going to create these drugs if you're just going to take it from us. Because if you're going to, and so therefore then everyone suffers as a result. It's a challenge of, you know, exactly what do you do? So
According to what you said, I could try and break in and steal it rather than try and bring it to court.
right.
Win in court.
If your life is at stake. Well, by the way, this question is an interesting question. The courts in America are not actually settled in the matter. For example, in California and New York have a disagreement, not on this particular issue, but on the question of if a person is starving to death and they break into a store to get food. So in California, that's not an excuse for violation of the crime. Also in Washington State, I believe. If you break in, you still are arrested and you still have to serve the time, even though you would have died if you didn't break in to get the food. But in New York, the law is actually written there that says if it's an instance of saving your life or another life, if you engage in some type of property damage or this, that the included in the law is an exemption for such a person. And of course, there's a fear that if you make the exemption too broad, then, you know, you've broken everything. But the courts are unclear because it's this moral dilemma of what do you do? Obviously, life seems to take precedence, but then there's the bigger question, maybe whose life? Is it your life or is it, you know, many people's lives? Judaism in general focuses on the individual life as opposed to the society, but it's not an easy question. So theft actually can have these other complications, but you see here at least the first opinion that says you may not steal under any circumstances is a little bit parallel to what Rashi is saying when he says the mitzvah here is that it's something serious. It's kidnapping. It's not just, you know, stealing a wallet or anything like that. What do we gain from these two different perspectives? We have Rashi and Sefer Chinuch and others on one side that say it's very specific, it's kidnapping, right? It's a capital offense, that's it. Versus, as I mentioned, the Sforno or Tosefta or others who say, no, there's many forms of theft, and they're all included in this category. So if you hold the first opinion, what do you gain by saying it's kidnapping? So one way of answering that question is, what I'd like to do is look at parallel legal systems, even those that preceded the Torah. Like, for example, Hammurabi's Code, which is very famous, but there's also laws in Egyptian society. We also can compare it a little bit to Roman law as well. What do you gain by saying, if you're looking at all the ancient legal systems, by saying do not steal is about do not kidnap? Okay, what's actually going on here? So first of all, the question you might want to ask is kidnapping such a serious problem that you have to, talk about it? What's so serious about kidnapping? I mean, was ancient society like Colombia, during the drug cartel years, where people were being kidnapped constantly and then ransomed off? It's like a sort of an economic way of making money. And what I'd suggest is that's not what the kidnapping, Sefer Chinuch or Rashi or anyone's really talking about. What kidnapping took place in the time of the Torah and Hammurabi? Joseph was kidnapped by his brothers, okay? Well, follow that through a little bit. Slaves. We're not talking about someone who's kidnapped for ransom. Slavery is built on this premise of kidnapping, of stealing a person. That's everything. I mean, whether it's in Egyptian society up through, you remember the slave trade from Africa to America. It's all built on the premise that you can steal a person, and a person is a property. In fact, sometimes certain people, in this understanding, are even less than property. That's what existed. In the time of Hammurabi, you were allowed to steal a person, right? If the person wasn't part of the elite. In Roman society as well, if you weren't a citizen, that means you were basically property. And therefore, if a person, a slave, did something wrong, he was your property, you were allowed to beat him, you were allowed to kill him. In fact, you were so much his property that there were instances when, for example, the master died, the slaves were killed along with the master because it was basically his stuff. And so therefore, they were allowed to kill them as well. You have a law in Hammurabi's code that's very interesting. It says that if a slave, because a slave has no rights on his own, if a slave says to his master, "You're not my master," you know what they did? They would cut off his ear. Now compare that with Jewish law, right? By the way, you can compare everything with Jewish law. Slaves are totally different, right? Slaves are people. They're not property. And slaves have all these additional rights. And if a slave says what? The opposite. "You are my master," then you puncture the ear, meaning the punishment is to say that I'm a slave, not that I'm not a slave. And you see this in a lot of different laws as well. For example, you have the runaway slave law. Right? What's a runaway slave law? In ancient societies, Hammurabi's code, if your property runs away, right, you have the right to get it. You have the right to sue. If he runs away to another person, you have the right to sue that person to return your property. In fact, that person is obligated to return the slave. Right? This existed in American law. There's a famous court case, I'm sure many of you perhaps remember the name, the Dred Scott decision. Dred Scott decision was that there was a slave was taken by his owner from a slave state to a free state. And once he's in the free state, the slave says, "I'm free." And he sued his master to be free. And he's just one case. There are many examples where slaves ran away to the north, and the south would sue the north, say, "You must return it because it's our property."
That was until the Emancipation Proclamation.
That was until the Emancipation Proclamation. By the way, it's an interesting case. The Dred Scott decision, just as a little piece of American history, Dred was the name of the family name of the slave owner. So Dred Scott is Dred. He took the name of his slave owner. Why did he take the name Scott? So when he was in the North, initially, before the trial actually began, they held him in military barracks. There was a military barracks led by, perhaps you've heard of him, Winifred Scott. Winifred Scott was a leader who fought against a lot of the Native Americans. This was in, I think, Minnesota or something like that. And Winifred Scott, who was known as a great soldier, in fact, that's where the expression Great Scott comes from, is after this Winifred Scott. Apparently, Dred Scott was in the military barracks, and every morning Winifred Scott would go with full uniform and walk with tremendous pride. And so Dred changed his name to Dred Scott because he saw this general and he wanted to have this tremendous amount of pride in his own existence. Perhaps that's what inspired him to fight for his rights when he saw Winifred Scott work this way. All of what I've just said is in contradistinction to Jewish law, right? It's not just the hammering of the ear, right? If a slave, the Torah tells us, if a slave from another country runs to you in Israel, you don't return him. If he's willing to accept, for example, the Sheva Mitzvah B'nai Noach, It's forbidden to return them. You're not allowed to return them at all. And in fact, in the time of the Yovel, when the Yovel is reinstituted, the Torah says, not only are you not allowed to, the whole world can come to Israel if they're slaves. Their whole world to come and to be free here. So Judaism looks at this very, very differently than the ancient world. And so you can understand why Rashi or Sefer Chinuch are focusing on do not kidnap, right? Because what they're saying is, they're not just simply saying this law is about not stealing. It's about upending an entire way of looking at the economic world of that time, which was slavery. And so they're trying to overturn that. There's other distinctions as well, because what is the punishment if you end up stealing, if you end up kidnapping a person? It's death, but only for the kidnapper. In Hammurabi's code, for example, if someone stole another person's kid, the punishment was not simply that the other person was killed, but also the other person's kid, meaning we killed whole families. That it wasn't just individual, right, responsibility. It was collective responsibility. There's an interesting law in Roman law, it's more of an aside, but when you would build a new arch, the first person who had to stand under the arch was the architect to make sure that it was safe. The parallel, though, is that if you were involved in a crime, your entire family could be punished as a result. Judaism is saying, no, it's that specific individual is what we're talking about. The biggest distinction, I think, that's made, of course, is how you look at people and how you look at properties. Judaism is saying, do not kidnap a nephesh. Do not steal a nephesh. A person is not property, right? The rest of the world viewed a person as property interchangeable. You can be punished if you steal, but you're not put to death because we make a distinction between a person and property. That's one of that's one of, I think, the important things that are being taught here. Yeah.
What about offense with a slave? Let's say the one who kidnaps a slave sells it, what happens to the one who buys it?
And willing, knowing it. So he's participating in a kidnapping. He's involved.
Is that a capital crime?
Yeah, well, there is a capital crime, but there's varying degrees, meaning the Rambam writes certain things have to be met in order for this to be called a kidnapping. I'll give you just one example. If you make it impossible for a person to leave a certain area, we call that in American law forced imprisonment. That doesn't count as kidnapping. Kidnapping is taking the person, physically moving them to a new area, and then selling them. That's the kidnap act. So the person who's buying is not always violates all these conditions, at least according to the Rambam. He's participant, and so therefore he could be punished. But if he didn't actually then move the person and sell the person and restrain the person, he might not actually be held. Okay, so let me just...
Doesn't get reimbursed either.
No, he doesn't get, right, exactly. Okay, let's now look at the other side of the equation. The other side of the equation is that lo tignov means exactly that. Do not steal. Do not steal a person. Do not steal money, right? The Rashbam says it's mammon we're talking about. Do not steal property. Do not steal, I just wrote a couple of other examples. Theft, intellectual property is another example that's used quite often. Initially, there was no such thing as intellectual property. If you look at the initial sources, for example, Shulchan Aruch says something that doesn't exist, you cannot steal, right? An idea. You can't steal that, and therefore you can't get paid for that. However, the rabbis changed that dynamic, and partly because the laws in which they lived in, or the countries they lived in, Dina de Malchut Dina says no, they started creating copyright law and things along those lines.
Patent laws.
What?
Patent.
Patent laws, and partly because, interesting enough, who do you think were the first people who had items stolen from them? Patent ideas stolen from them. Rabbis. Why? Because they were writing. And so there's the first case we have in Jewish law of copyright infringement or something along that lines was a rabbi who wrote a commentary on the Mishnah, and he spent a lot of time creating the typesetting, right, for the printing. He printed that, and then the publisher held on to the print the way it was printed and everything like that. And then he printed additional Mishnayot with other people's commentaries, but using the same structure of the Mishnah and everything like that. And the first rabbi sued him and says, I invested a lot of time and money, and that is actually the beginning of Jewish copyright law. The truth is, even though that's the source of Jewish copyright law, and it's much later, it's only the 1500s or something like that, 1600s, the truth is you could really argue, and there's a rabbi in New York, Rabbi J. David Blake, who argues there can't be copyright law when it comes to Torah. When it comes to anything else, there is. Patent law and creative. There was a case of a person who came up with the idea of putting a dead fish, a fisherman, who threw a dead fish in his net, and the blood attracted other fish, and he collected fish. Technically, things that are collected in the ocean are called hefker. So other fishermen started taking from the fish that were being collected in his net. And he sued and he won because he created the idea of putting blood in the water to attract fish. And he actually won that case. But Torah is different. What's the case we have in the Torah, or in the Talmud, that suggests that you can't copyright Torah? The story is of Hillel, right? Hillel, you had to used to pay to get into a Shir. If you're looking for other crimes to be involved in besides just breaking into the drug company, you might want to break into the OU Center without paying. Why? Hillel, it used to be a shekel or two to get into the Beit Midrash. Hillel couldn't afford it, and so he climbs up on top of the roof. There seemed to be like some type of skylight or something, and he listened to the Shir through the skylight. We know this, right, because the snow comes on him, and he's so intense in the learning. He freezes. They take him out. They put him in front of the fire. They never say what he did was wrong. And we learn from that, at least J. David Blake says, that you can't copyright Torah law. It's from God. God's the author, is the children of, billions of people. You can see an about the author section, like in the back of they should have in the Torah, like an about the author section, all these type of things. But you can't copyright anything that's Torah because it's all directly from God and Torah. And therefore, if you put a copyright in any book, he says it's worthless. If it's a Torah book, it's worthless. They say you're not allowed to print this.
Isn't there plagiarism?
No, he says if it's Torah, there's no such No, you certainly have to give credit. Meaning, if you took an idea of someone, that's stealing as well. That's stealing credit. But in terms of, however, what many Torah books now do, and if you look, for example, in the Benchers, right, they'll say a lot of effort went into not the words, the typesetting, the font, the translation, meaning what they're copywriting is the extra work that was done for this particular volume, not not the actual ideas based upon that concern. So this position, this Warner position, there says there's many other different types of laws that have to do with theft, and it's all included in here. And we, in fact, I may have mentioned this once before. I found a book called The 7 Laws of Noah. The 7 Laws of Noah, which gives us a little bit of an insight into what your question about how one law has many different manifestations. So in this book, tells the story of this person in the 1800s, a non-Jewish guy who's very naturally, his name is, I think, Palmieri, who is very naturally connected, Paleri, to spirituality. And he's raised as a Catholic. He wants to become a priest. He learns Hebrew in order to become a good priest. He comes across the Hebrew for an alma, right? So an almanah is a widow, but alma is like a woman who, I'm sorry? Yeah, right. Well, that's how it's often translated, but that's not the Hebrew, right? The Hebrew has could be a young woman. It has different meaning, and he's very disturbed that all of so an alma, there's different understandings of alma. The way Christianians understand it is that she's a virgin, and so Christianity is based upon this word, that this woman, a virgin, gives birth, right? Isaiah also speaks about the same, gives birth to a child, which is a miracle. But if you understand the word differently as a young maiden, right? So a young maiden who gives birth is different than saying a virgin who gives birth. It's less miraculous, right? So he comes across this understanding, and he actually is shattered. He says, my entire religion is based on a mistranslation. And he looks for other spiritual homes. He looks for Protestantism, so forth and so on. And he meets a rabbi in Italy by the name of Eliyahu ben Amozeg, who actually has written some beautiful works on universalism within Judaism. And he says, what should I do? Judaism makes sense to me. And the Rav Eliyahu writes back to him and says, you should become a B'nai Noach. And this Paleri says, a B'nai Noach. You should follow the 7 laws of Noach. And he writes back and says, no, that's so disappointing. Christianity, even though I don't necessarily think it's true anymore, at least had 1,900 years of development. It's a very sophisticated type of legal system. Judaism is beyond belief, incredibly sophisticated. The Talmud, 2,500 pages, it's amazing. You want me to, I'm striving for spirituality, and you want me to take 7 simple laws? Like, that's going to be a spiritual disappointment for me. And Rav Eliyahu writes to him and says, first of all, you have to understand that Noachism, right, being a B'nai Noach, it's not so simple. It's part of the original plan. God put it forth to Noach, and Abraham was originally a B'nai Noach. He says also, you could do the exact same thing that Jews did. Our Torah is timeless and also develops. So you could create your own Talmud on a B'nai Noach. You can interpret as much as you want. And then he also goes on and says, and this is something very similar to what the Sad Gaon says. Sad Gaon says about the 10 Commandments. Why are the 10 Commandments important? The 10 Commandments are important because they include all the mitzvot in the Torah. Every mitzvah in the 10 Commandments actually has many, many derivatives. So he says the same thing about the Sheva Mitzvah B'nai Noach. He says, you don't get up to 613, but if you really understand the Sheva Mitzvah B'nai Noach, you'll find yourself being commanded in a couple hundred actual commandments. And he has a chapter here about lo tignov, about not stealing. And he says this mitzvah of not stealing actually includes do not desire your neighbor's home. Why? Why is it do not covet? Because that's the first step in stealing, is you begin to covet something. It includes, obviously, against regular stealing. In Vayikra, I already mentioned, there's a verse, lo tignavu. That's also included. Against committing robbery, lo tigzol. It includes shifting a landmark, right, between properties. That's a form of theft. Against cheating. Against repudiation of a money claim that's owed to you, or owed to someone. Someone says you say, I don't owe you that. Against, we just had this in the last week's parsha, lo tonu, right, overcharging. Against another coveting, another desiring, against the laborer eating fruit when the conditions are not met, against the owner not allowing his laborer to eat fruit. The rabbis are very sensitive about time as well. You're allowed to be exempt from saying the 4th bracha if it's going to take away from work that you owe your employer. So he goes on, and he actually lists 16 different mitzvot that emanate from this lo tignov. And so there's a whole range of additional mitzvot. If you hold this position, not that it's not kidnapping, it's the entire panoply of stealing, what do you gain by that? We understand what you gain by saying it's not kidnapping. You make a clear distinction with the rest of the ancient world at that point in time. What do you gain here at this point in time when you say lo tignov includes many, many other things? So I think there's a couple of different ideas that we could talk about. Some of them are theological. For example, on the other page on the source sheet, you'll see the very beginning where I quote from Bereshit, right? And the earth was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence, right? It was filled with Timaleha Aretz Hamas. Hamas in Hebrew means violence. And God saw the land, and it was corrupt and destructive. And this violence is what ultimately, Rashi says in the next source, is the cause of the destruction that ultimately emanates and brings forth the flood. What was Hamas? What's the violence that he's referring to? There's different opinions. One opinion just simply says it was robbery. People used to steal from one another. It's that in itself. Some go a step further and say it wasn't just robbery, but what? that they would steal less than the amount necessary to actually receive punishment, right?
Don't.
Yeah, right, it's that type of thing. They would steal just a grape in the market, right? And when they'd steal a grape in the market, they couldn't be punished for it. But the poor shopkeeper, everyone did it, and at the end, he had no grapes, he didn't sell any, and no one technically stole from him. So they said that was the type of thievery that they were involved in, is that they found within the letter of the law, right, they ate less than the amount, they were able to destroy one another. So there's a theological element here about stealing, about sort of taking that which is not yours, but doing it, it's not as serious as other crimes, perhaps. He mentions here, the world was corrupt. Rav Hirsch, the second point, talks about robbery and theft undermines entire societies. If you have societies where people steal from one another, they are not societies that exist for very long. If you look, for example, in certain African countries that have tremendous amounts of natural resources, but at the top, their people have just basically stolen, right? The leaders have basically stolen all the monies. The societies are still, quagmired in poverty and starvation and famine and all these different things. I just read a book recently about in Moldova. This person is visiting Moldova, and he notices that people will only go to doctors over the age of 60. That's it. They don't go to any young doctors. They only go to doctors over the age of 60. Why do they only go to such doctors? So when the Soviet Union, Moldova used to be a former communist country, when they pulled out, corruption became very, very big in Moldova, and the wealthy started buying their college degrees and their medical degrees. So what happens? They're buying the medical degrees. The doctors are not worth, they don't know anything. So people only would go to the older doctors who actually learned in medical school and actually took their tests, because again, corruption undermines your trust in the entire society. And if you have no trust, so you can't run a country that way. You can't run a society that way. If you think, you're gonna, when you get pulled over, if the law is not fair, if it doesn't treat you fair, so you're not gonna ever stop. Multiply that by 1,000,000 times, society will be destroyed, yes.
Say for Yonah and Nineveh, apparently supposedly the crime in Nineveh was stealing.
Yeah. So you can see, right, so you see it in Nineveh, you see it in Stone, you see it here with the time of Noah. There's the stealing is endemic. It's also an indicator of the level of trust within the society, and the level of respect for authority and respect for your fellow man. And it's almost as if I want to live in my own world without concern of anyone else, right? Everything is mine, so to speak. There is no respect of anyone else's personal property. Property itself, to be able to respect, if you want to get more sort of political, just a couple of days we had the 200th anniversary of Marx's birth. So I read a number of articles about Marx's birth recently. It's interesting. His own hometown, they built a big statue for him, and in his childhood home is now this store that actually sells a lot of like tourist, like clothing and all these like different things. So it's a big commercial center in the middle of, I think the town is Trier or something like that. But anyway, Marx felt you have to get rid of all this, personal property. But once you get rid of all this personal property, once the government can just take whatever it wants, and everyone else can take whatever they want, that's very often the beginning of the destruction of the society. Society is built on respect of what people have, built, is usually a society that will ultimately be more successful. There's another element, I think, that's very important about why stealing, in a general sense, is very problematic. And you can get this by looking at one particular type of stealing, which is on the other page. I'm just going to try to say it very quickly, is Gnevat Dat. Right? Are we familiar with Gnevat Dat? Gnevat Dat is, there's many different categories of Gnevat Dat. It's stealing someone's mind. It's pretending to be something you're not. So someone holds you in higher esteem than perhaps you deserve. The cases in the Gemara are, you're not allowed to invite someone to a party if you know that they're out of town, right? You know that they can't come. Because you're basically trying to, in a sense, get the reward of being a nice guy when you know that they're not going to take you up on it. There's exceptions to that, of course. If they would be offended if you didn't invite them, obviously you should invite them. The real problem is just to urge them constantly. No, please, you must come, you must come, you must come, when you really don't want them to come. That's the problem. The story is going to I was reminded of this because someone in my shul was very excited, and I realized that he may have been over a prohibition. Someone brought a very good bottle of whiskey a few Shabbatot ago, and it went. And then there were a number of other people who brought less good bottles of whiskey. But this person, who will remain nameless, kept pouring the really bad whiskey, I don't know if it's really bad, I don't drink whiskey, so I don't know, into the good bottle, and went around pouring for it. And everyone loved the whiskey. I don't know if you were there for that Shabbat. Everyone was, he didn't do it during the weekday minyan, because they actually know their taste. But on Shabbat, he went around, and everyone thought it was, but there's a problem with Geneva Stat there, that a person thinks you're doing something nicer for them than you really are. In the case, it says in an Avelis house, apparently people used to go and they would bring open bottles of wine. And they would put the open bottles of wine on the table, because there would be a lot of bottles of wine. And the Avel, the mourner, would simply assume that people drank the wine, when in fact all you actually brought was, half a bottle, a quarter. So there's all these concerns of, making people think you're better than what you are, that you care for them more than you actually do. There's a very extensive literature on this. Geneva Stats. Obviously, counting, you can't fool around with accounting. That could send, that's Geneva Stats, right? The auditors think if you do too much creative accounting that you have more money than you actually have. There was an interesting case that came up. The synagogue wanted to get more money. So synagogues, sometimes they auction off honors, right? They'll auction off this aliyah or that aliyah. So they know that there's always one guy who has to get this aliyah, and he'll pay whatever the cost is. So they went to another guy and says, just keep bidding. Don't worry, he's going to outbid you no matter what. He says, but I can't. He says, don't worry, if you win, we won't make you pay the whole thing, but just get him to bid up higher. So actually, the guy who paid the higher amount found out that that's what the synagogue was doing to him, and brought to the Beit Din. And they said, that's Geneva Stat. That's, absolutely. And it's Geneva Stat on who specifically? No, the synagogue has its own problems. The synagogue is potentially involved in stealing. But the shill, right, the person who kept bidding, right, and if he won, there's Geneva Stat. Because why? The synagogue didn't make him pay, right? Let's say he bids, I'm just throwing out wild numbers, $1 million. They only made him pay $1,000. So everyone thinks that he paid $1 million. So he, by participating in besides the deception, is Geneva Stat. He received more benefit. People perceive him differently, that he did something that he didn't do. That, I think, is part of the real problem of Geneva Stat, and I'd like to suggest it's connected to the problem of stealing in general. If you look on we'll end here. There's more to say, and maybe next time I'll just add a couple points here or there, but the point that I want to end with, maybe just quickly, 2 points. One is, you see there's a Gemara in Chulin called Deception, right, deception there. Mar Zutra, the son of Rabbi Nachman, was once going, this is the introduction of the concept of Geneva Stat. Certain rabbi, Mar Zutra, is walking and he's going to a town. Rabbi and Rav Safra are going to a different town. They meet along the way. This other rabbi, Mar Zutra, comes in and says, what a great honor it is for the two of you to be coming out and greeting me. They weren't coming out to greet him. They're traveling their own. Thank you for this great honor. What did I do to deserve such a great honor? So, at this point in time, Rabbah, he tells the truth. He says, Rav Safra says, we did not know that the master was coming, to be honest. Had we known, we would have come out to greet you, but that's not why we're actually here. Rabbah says, why'd you tell him this? Now he'll be offended, right? There is a certain amount of seichel you have to have. You're not supposed to, you don't have to, my wife always gets so upset with me. Whenever we travel, I cannot lie in front of the El Al people or the immigration people. They say, "Are you bringing in, any fruits? Are you?" And maybe I'll have like a strawberry yogurt that I'm taking off the El Al plane. It says, "Do not," and we've gotten to a fight. It says, "Do not say that you're taking something from Israel, a fruit." I said, "But it's a strawberry yogurt. Do not say." I always say it, and they then put us in the back of the line, and they start going through everything and say, "You have to have a certain amount of seichel also. You don't have to say everything, if your intention is not to deceive people in that way." Rava says, "You didn't have to tell them this. Why? It's not that you were deceiving him. He was deceiving himself. He thought he was deserving of such a great honor." And that's one of the principles in Geneva Stat to always keep in mind. If the person's deceiving themselves, right, because there's, for example, an interesting case that came up of whether or not there's a person in a store used to spray wine in his store because the smell was very positive. And he actually was told he can't do that anymore because it's Geneva Stat, because it will inspire people to want to buy. And they said, well, what's wrong about that? It's like spraying the fake cookie dough in a house. Real estate agents sometimes do this. Baking cookies by the way, which may be Geneva Stat also. So you sprayed it and you didn't actually cook the cookies. They say people may think that that's the wine that you're selling, and if you're not selling it, that could be potentially misleading. And people say, no, if they think, that the smell of wine is what makes the store better, they're deceiving themselves, right? So there's a certain amount of potential logic in there. But go to the first page, the last Gemara on the page, Brachot. What's the real issue in Geneva Stat? What I'd suggest is the real issue in Geneva Stat is the real issue of theft in general. And it's a theological problem. The Gemara in Brachot, a man is forbidden to enjoy anything of this world without a benediction, right? You can't enjoy this world without making a bracha. And whoever does so commits a sacrilege. Rav Judah says in the name of Shmuel, Konana mina olam hazeh below bracha. The word, by the way, it's a sacrilege, but it's me'il. Me'il is stealing from the hekdesh. It's a form of thievery that the Hebrew is describing for us. It's as if someone donates something to the Beit HaMikdash and you take that. That's what the problem is if you enjoy this world without making a bracha. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Kol hanen mina olam hazeh, below bracha ki ilu neheneh mekoche shamayim. It's as if you've taken from the heavens. Shnei Amar, as it says in Tehillim, Lashem haaretz umlolo. Right, to God is the heavens and the earth. The earth is all His. Rabbi Levi Rami throws a challenge. Wait a second. It says that to Hashem is given the everything. But it's also said the heavens are Hashemayim Shemayim Lashem. The heavens are for God. The haaretz natan livnei adam. The land is given to human beings. So therefore, we should be allowed to enjoy this world, right? It's not stealing from God. God gave it to us. And the Gemara concludes, says, Lo kasha, it's not a challenge, kan kodem bracha, meaning this land is given to us only after you make a bracha and you recognize the true owner. Right. Once you recognize that this is God's, and now God gives it to you as a gift, and you express, a bracha is not simply about thanking God. It's recognizing God as the creator of everything and giving us the source of allowing this. Once you do that, then it's yours. So the problem with theft, I think, and Geneva Stat is believing you deserve something that you didn't do. I gave $1 million when in fact I didn't do that at all. This person feels that I really love them when I really don't, right? It's gaining a benefit for something that you didn't do. That's the problem with theft in general, is you're taking something that's not yours and you're making it yours, when in fact, everything is God's, right? When you steal from someone else, you're really stealing from God. You're saying that this is mine, and I've developed it myself and everything along those lines. That's the real problem of theft. It's a rejection that God created the world, and when God created the world, God can give this person that, and God can give you this. And you have to samech b'chalko, be happy with those two different things. And if you want to get more, that's fine. But don't take from this person who's already been given from God. It's a theological problem, and it's a denial of God of creating the world and God running the world when one engages in theft. Okay, I apologize. I went a little over and I rushed to the end. Maybe next time we'll do 5 minutes of a few other points. Have a good week.
Thank you.